savage outlaws kill a mountain man's dog, unaware he is the most lethal hunter ever. In the snowy high country, a lonely man has only one friend, his faithful hound. But when a band of ruthless outlaws gun the dog down for sport, they unleash something they never expected. This isn't just an old man in a cabin. He's the deadliest tracker the mountains have ever seen. Yet, as he sharpens his knife and takes up his rifle, a wounded Apache boy stumbles into his life, carrying a secret map that could change everything. Now vengeance collides with duty, and mercy battles rage in a storm of gunfire, snow, and blood. The outlaws think they're hunting easy prey. But the real question is, will the hunter's thirst for justice save the innocent, or destroy what little faith he has left? Your comments remind me that we're not alone in feeling deeply. If loyalty, second chances, and human dignity mean something to you, then you're right where you belong. The winter wind howled across the mountain peaks, rattling the timber walls of Noel Keller's small line shack. Inside, the old hunter stirred a pot of venison stew hanging over the hearth, the savory scent filling the single room. His faithful hound Bramble lay curled near the fire, gray muzzle resting on weathered paws. Noel ladled stew into 2 worn tin bowls, one for himself, one for Bramble. "Here you go, old friend," he said softly, setting the dog's portion within easy reach. The hound's tail thumped against the plank floor in appreciation. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Outside, snow whispered against the windows, but inside was warm and peaceful. Noel settled into his chair, watching Bramble eat with gentle contentment in his eyes. These quiet evenings helped keep the memories at bay. Memories of his years as an army scout, of things he'd rather forget. He'd seen too much death, caused too much pain. That's why he'd chosen this solitary life high in the mountains, where he could live simply with just Bramble for company. "Never again," he whispered, more to himself than the dog. The vow he'd made years ago still held firm. He would never take another life. He'd found peace in these mountains, tracking game for food, but nothing more. Bramble finished his stew and padded over to rest his head on Noel's knee. The old hunter ran calloused fingers through the dog's graying fur, grateful for the warmth of his companion. In the deepest part of night, gunshots echoed in the distance, sharp cracks that cut through the storm's moan. Noel sat up in his narrow bed, instantly alert. Bramble lifted his head, ears pricked forward. "Easy now," Noel murmured, pulling on his boots and heavy coat. He'd learned long ago to investigate any disturbance. Trouble had a way of finding even the most remote places. The pre-dawn air bit cold as he saddled his mule. Bramble whined, wanting to come along. "Stay here, boy. Guard the place." The dog settled reluctantly by the door as Noel rode out into the darkness. Hours passed as he searched, following tracks that the storm quickly covered. But he found nothing. No signs of struggle, no blood in the snow, no answers to what had broken the night's peace. By midday, he turned back toward home, the mule picking its way carefully through deepening drifts. Evening found him splitting kindling by lamplight, stacking the wood near the door. Bramble dozed nearby, his breathing slow and steady. The lamp's gentle glow barely reached the edge of the clearing, where shadows gathered thick between the trees. The crack of branches shattered the silence. Rough voices and drunken laughter carried through the dark. 3 men stumbled into the clearing, reeking of cheap whiskey. Noel straightened slowly, axe still in hand. "Well, what have we here?" The tallest outlaw sneered, swaying slightly. "Mountain man and his mutt." Bramble rose, hackles lifting, but didn't growl. He was too well trained for that, standing protective beside his master. "Evening, gentlemen," Noel said evenly. "You're welcome to water your horses and move on." The second man spat in the snow. "Ain't that neighborly?" He elbowed his companion, both laughing too loud in the gathering dark. The third man, eyes glassy with drink, raised his rifle. The movement was casual, almost lazy. "Nice dog," he slurred. Everything seemed to slow down. Noel saw the man's finger tighten on the trigger. He opened his mouth to shout, to move, to do something, anything. The shot cracked across the clearing like breaking ice. Bramble made no sound as he fell. One moment he was standing, proud and steady as always. The next, he lay crumpled in the snow, blood spreading dark beneath him. The outlaws' laughter echoed through the trees as they disappeared into the timber, leaving Noel frozen in place, the axe fallen forgotten from nerveless fingers. "No," he whispered, dropping to his knees beside Bramble. "No, no, no." The dog's eyes were already growing dim, but his tail twitched once in recognition as Noel gathered him close. Blood soaked through Noel's shirt as he cradled his friend, rocking slightly back and forth. "I'm here, boy. I'm here." His voice broke on the words. Bramble's last breath came as a soft sigh, and then he was gone. For a long time, Noel knelt in the snow, holding his dog's cooling body. Tears froze on his cheeks as he whispered prayers into Bramble's fur. Prayers he hadn't spoken since leaving the army, prayers for mercy and forgiveness. Finally, when his legs had gone numb from the cold, he stood. The lamp still burned in the window, casting just enough light to work by. He retrieved his shovel from the lean-to and began to dig. The ground was frozen hard as iron, but Noel kept at it, chopping through the frost layer, then scooping away dirt until he had a proper grave. His hands blistered and split, but he barely noticed the pain. Throughout the long task, he remained silent, letting his labor speak his grief. When the hole was deep enough, he lowered Bramble's body with gentle care, arranging him as if he were only sleeping. Back inside the shack, the candle flickered low in its holder. The room felt vast and empty now, the silence absolute where once there had been the comfort of Bramble's steady breathing. Noel sat in his chair by the cold hearth, staring at nothing, while outside the winter night drew its dark curtain across the mountains. The bitter dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-laden trees in shades of steel and pearl. Noel's shoulders ached as he worked to finish Bramble's grave, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Frost had gathered in his graying beard, but he barely noticed the cold. His focus remained on making this final bed worthy of his faithful friend. He placed the last shovelful of earth with care, smoothing it with trembling hands. The work wasn't done yet. A proper grave needed stones to keep predators away. Noel straightened slowly, his joints protesting the night's labor in the frozen ground. "Won't be long now, old friend," he murmured, turning toward the tree line where suitable rocks could be found beneath the snow. The morning silence wrapped around him like a shroud, broken only by the soft crunch of his boots in the fresh powder. A sound caught his ear. Faint, almost lost in the whisper of wind through the pines. He paused, head tilted. There it came again. A cry, weak but human, carrying desperation in its tone. Noel moved cautiously toward the sound, tracking its source to the eastern edge of his clearing. Movement caught his eye, a small figure stumbling between the trees, leaving a dark trail in the pristine snow. A boy emerged from the shadows, no more than 12 years old, his Apache clothing torn and bloodied. His right leg dragged, blood seeping from a wound that had soaked through his legging. Their eyes met across the space between them, the boy's wide with pain and fear. "Grandfather!" the boy gasped in Apache, swaying dangerously. "Help!" Noel reached him just as his strength gave out. He caught the boy before he could fall, noting how light and cold he felt in his arms. The wound in his leg was a clean shot, through and through, but he'd lost too much blood already. "I've got you, son," Noel said softly in Apache, his old scout days bringing the language back easily. "You're safe now." He carried the boy into the shack, laying him gently on his own narrow bed. The wound needed tending first. Everything else could wait. Noel worked quickly but carefully, cleaning the injury with boiled water and binding it with strips torn from his cleanest shirt. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness as Noel worked, muttering in Apache about men with guns and broken promises. When the bandaging was done, Noel heated some broth from yesterday's stew and helped the boy sip it slowly. "What's your name?" Noel asked in Apache, keeping his voice gentle. "Tay," the boy answered, his eyes clearer now that some warmth and food were in him. He looked around the cabin warily, then back at Noel. "You speak the language well, grandfather?" Noel nodded, something in his chest tightening at the respectful term. "I learned long ago. Can you tell me what happened to you?" Tay's face darkened with memory. "Bad men came to our camp 3 days ago. They needed someone who knew the mountain paths." His hands clenched in the blanket. "They took me, made me show them the way. But when I saw what they planned," he shook his head, "I refused to lead them further. The drunk one shot me." "These men," Noel said carefully, "were they 3? One tall, one who spits, one who drinks too much?" Tay nodded, then his eyes caught sight of the fresh dirt visible through the window. "The grave, did they?" "They killed my dog," Noel said simply, the words still raw in his throat. "For sport." "I am sorry, grandfather," Tay said softly. "To kill a man's dog is to kill part of his spirit." Noel helped the boy drink more broth, watching as exhaustion gradually overcame him. Soon, Tay was sleeping deeply, his breathing steady and strong. The boy would heal well, given time and rest. As evening approached, Noel checked Tay's wound again. The bleeding had stopped, and there was no sign of fever. While adjusting the blanket, he noticed a small leather pouch that had fallen from the boy's clothes. A medicine bag, decorated with careful beadwork. Noel hesitated. Such pouches were sacred, not to be handled by outsiders. But something about Tay's story nagged at him. Those men hadn't just been random outlaws passing through. They'd deliberately sought an Apache guide, and Tay had refused to lead them further. Why? With careful reverence, Noel opened the medicine pouch. Among the sacred items, a hawk feather, a small crystal, dried herbs, he found a folded paper, worn soft at the creases. He opened it slowly, conscious of its age and importance. It was a map, marked with an official treaty seal. Noel's breath caught as he studied it by the fading daylight. It showed a network of springs scattered through these mountains, water sources vital to the Apache people, guaranteed to them by treaty. Some of the springs he recognized, having used them himself over the years. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Those men weren't just killers. They were hired guns, probably working for someone who wanted those water rights. Someone who knew that controlling the springs meant controlling the territory. Noel carefully returned the map and pouch to Tay's belongings. The snow was falling heavily now, thick flakes whitening the world beyond his windows. They would be sealed in for the night, maybe longer. He pulled on his coat and stepped outside, making his way to Bramble's grave. The stones would have to wait until tomorrow. The snow was coming too fast now. Noel knelt beside the fresh earth, his heart heavy with understanding and conflict. "What do I do, old friend?" he whispered. His hand rested on the cold ground where Bramble lay. "I swore never to kill again, but these men, they'll bring more death if they're not stopped." The snow gathered on his shoulders as he wrestled with his conscience. How do I protect the living without breaking my vow to the dead? Only the soft hiss of falling snow answered him. In the shack, a lamp flickered warm and golden, where a wounded boy slept with his people's future hidden in a beaded pouch. Out in the darkness, somewhere, 3 killers carried news of secret springs to whoever had hired them. Noel remained by the grave until the cold forced him inside, his question still unanswered, his path still unclear. The night settled over the mountain like a smothering blanket, while the snow erased all traces of what had passed before. Dawn crept over the mountain with hesitant fingers of gray light. Inside the shack, Noel woke to the sound of labored breathing. Tay lay tangled in sweat-dampened blankets, his face drawn with pain. Noel pressed a weathered hand to the boy's forehead. No fever, thank the Lord, but the wound was clearly causing him considerable distress. Moving quietly, he stoked the dying embers and hung the copper kettle over the flames. His hands worked from memory as he gathered dried willow bark from his stores. Sarah had taught him this. His wife had been known throughout the territory for her healing touch. The familiar ache of loss pressed against his chest as he remembered her patient instructions, the gentle way she'd prepared remedies for sick neighbors and injured travelers. "Watch the color," she'd always said. "Tea too strong burns the tongue, too weak won't ease the pain." The kettle began to sing. Noel measured the bark carefully, letting it steep until the water turned a pale amber. He added a spoonful of precious honey, another of Sarah's tricks for making medicine more palatable. "Tay," he called softly, supporting the boy's head. "Drink this. It will help with the pain." The boy's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. "Thank you, grandfather," he murmured in Apache, taking small sips. The words caught Noel off guard. Something shifted in his chest, like ice breaking up in spring. He hadn't expected to hear that term of respect again, hadn't known how much he'd longed for it. His throat tightened as memories of his own grandson, lost to fever 5 winters past, surfaced unbidden. By noon, the willow bark had done its work. Tay sat up straighter, color returning to his cheeks. He watched intently as Noel moved about the cabin, preparing a simple meal of cornbread and dried apple. "Could you teach me?" Tay asked suddenly, pointing to the snares hanging by the door. "My father began to show me, but—" He left the sentence unfinished, grief shadowing his young face. "Can you walk?" Tay demonstrated by standing carefully, favoring his injured leg but managing to stay upright. Noel nodded, gathering the wire snares and leading the way outside. The snow had transformed the clearing into a blank page, unmarked except for rabbit tracks that crossed like delicate stitching. Noel chose a spot near a cluster of snow-laden brush where several trails converged. "Watch close now," he instructed, demonstrating how to bend the wire without kinking it. "The trick is in the trigger. Too tight, they'll smell the metal. Too loose, they'll slip right through." Tay proved an eager student, his fingers quick to learn despite the cold. They set 6 snares together, the boy's limp becoming less pronounced as he focused on the task. When the work was done, they returned to the warmth of the cabin. The afternoon light filtered through frost-rimed windows as they sat before the fire. Noel reached for his old Bible, its leather cover smooth from years of handling. He read simply, choosing verses about peace and protection, about the Good Shepherd watching over his flock. When he finished, Tay began to sing softly, an Apache prayer song, its melody rising and falling like wind through canyon walls. The two traditions twined together in the quiet cabin, neither diminishing the other. As Noel prepared their evening meal, Tay asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him. "Why do you have no rifle, grandfather? I see you are a hunter, yet you carry no gun." Noel stirred the beans slowly, gathering his thoughts. "I made a vow," he said finally. "After what I saw, what I did, as an army scout." He paused, the memories still sharp as thorns. There was a village, women, children. The commander said they were hiding raiders, but... He shook his head. "I swore never to raise a rifle again." "I understand your pain," Tay said quietly. "But my people, the springs on that map are life itself. Without them, we cannot survive. The cattle barons want them, and their men will kill to take them." He looked up at Noel, his young face grave. "If no one stands against them, my people will die." Noel served their supper in silence, the boy's words echoing in his mind. As they ate, the storm that had held them hostage began to clear. The setting sun painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of purple and gold. Movement caught Noel's eye. Rising from a distant ridge, a column of smoke stood out against the evening sky, too dark and thick to be from simple campfires. His jaw tightened. Those men were up to something bigger, something that required more than just the three of them. After Tay had fallen asleep, Noel sat at his small table, a lamp casting yellow light over his hands. Before him lay his old hunting knife, its blade still keen despite years of use. The whetstone made a soft singing sound as he drew it carefully along the edge. "What choice do I have?" he whispered to the empty air. A vow of peace weighs heavy, but the cost of doing nothing. The knife gleamed in the lamplight as he tested its edge. Sometimes a man must choose between his conscience and his duty. Outside, the stars emerged one by one as the last clouds fled east. The night air grew sharp with cold, and somewhere on that distant ridge, men plotted violence against a people whose only crime was living on land others coveted. Noel worked the whetstone with slow, deliberate strokes, each pass bringing him closer to a decision he'd hoped never to face again. The first hint of sunrise painted the eastern sky in pale gold as Noel stepped out into the crisp mountain air. His breath formed clouds in the cold as he made his way to the lean-to where his mule dozed. The sturdy animal lifted its head, ears pricking forward at his approach. "Easy there, old friend," Noel murmured, running a calloused hand down the mule's neck. He began securing spare blankets behind the saddle, checking each strap with careful attention. Into the saddlebags went dried meat, hard biscuits, and a small sack of coffee beans, enough provisions for several days on the trail. Back in the cabin, Tay sat wrapped in a wool blanket, his dark eyes following Noel's movements. The boy's leg was healing, but the wound still pained him. Noel could see it in the tight set of his jaw. "We need to reach the springs before those men do," Noel explained, packing the last of their supplies. "Your people will need warning." Tay nodded solemnly. "The springs are sacred to us. Without them—" He left the thought unfinished, but Noel understood. Water meant life in this harsh country. The sun had cleared the horizon by the time they set out, the mule's hooves breaking through the crusty snow. Noel walked beside the animal, leading it carefully along the narrow trail while Tay rode, his injured leg stretched out to one side. The boy sat the mule well, moving naturally with its gait despite his discomfort. Snow lay deep in the shadowed draws, forcing them to pick their way with caution. Noel called frequent halts, watching how Tay's face grew drawn with pain despite his attempts to hide it. During one such rest, as the boy sipped water from Noel's canteen, they spotted fresh elk sign in a patch of cleared ground. "See here," Noel said, crouching beside a distinctive print. "The way the snow's disturbed tells us when they passed." He pointed to the track's crisp edges. "These are fresh, made just before dawn." Tay leaned forward from the mule's back, studying the signs intently. "There are many?" "A small herd," Noel confirmed. 5, maybe 6. He indicated subtle marks in the snow. "See how they browsed these branches? Elk are patient creatures. They'll spend hours working through a good feeding ground, not rushing from place to place like deer." "Like a good hunter," Tay observed quietly. "Just so," Noel agreed, remembering countless mornings spent teaching his grandson similar lessons. The memory brought a familiar ache to his chest. They pressed on through the afternoon, the sun a pale disk behind thin clouds. The trail wound higher, skirting steep drops where the wind had sculpted snow into delicate cornices. As darkness approached, Noel found them shelter in a deep ravine, the walls blocking the worst of the wind. He built a small fire, keeping it low to avoid drawing attention. As they shared a simple meal of dried meat and cold biscuits, Noel's thoughts turned to Bramble. The old hound had been an uncanny tracker, able to follow the faintest scent trail through snow or rain. More than that, he'd been a faithful friend through long years of solitude. The empty space beside the fire seemed to echo with his absence. Tay must have noticed something in his expression. "You miss your dog," he said softly. Noel nodded, not trusting his voice for a moment. "He was a good friend," he managed finally. "The best tracker I ever knew." They bedded down early, huddled close to share warmth. The night passed slowly, broken by the occasional cry of a hunting owl. Morning brought heavy snow, fat flakes falling so thick they could barely see 50 feet ahead. Noel knew it would be foolish to attempt the higher passes in such conditions. They found shelter beneath a stand of towering pines, their thick boughs creating a natural roof. "We cannot wait," Tay insisted, his voice tight with worry. "My mother, my little sister, they are at the winter camp near the springs, if those men reach them first." "I understand your fear," Noel said gently. "But in this weather we'd likely lose our way. Or worse, the mule could slip on hidden ice." He gestured at the whirling snow. "Sometimes waiting is the fastest way forward." The boy subsided, though Noel could see the struggle in his face. As they waited out the storm, Tay spoke of his family, of his mother's skill at beadwork, how she could create intricate patterns that told stories of their people. He described his little sister's laugh, the way she would dance with joy at the first spring flowers. "She is only 6 years old," Tay said softly. "Too young to understand why men would want to take our water, our land." Noel felt the weight of the boy's trust, his responsibility to see him safely home. The storm raged for hours, but by mid-afternoon, the snow began to slacken. Soon only scattered flakes drifted down through suddenly blue skies. They resumed their journey, the fresh snow making travel even slower. The mule plowed steadily forward, steam rising from its flanks. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge and saw below them a small valley cradled between steep slopes. At its center stood a mission church, its weathered walls and bell tower a stark contrast to the pristine white landscape. Thin smoke rose from the church's stone chimney, curling lazily in the still air. Noel felt Tay straighten in the saddle. "I know this place," the boy said. "The priest there is kind to my people. He speaks against those who would steal our land." Noel studied the approaching darkness, weighing their options. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and they'd pushed hard through difficult conditions. Both Tay and the mule needed real rest. "We'll head down," he decided. "A proper roof tonight will do us good." They began their careful descent as the last light faded from the sky, the mission's windows glowing with welcome warmth. Noel led them down the snowy slope, his thoughts on the shelter ahead and the long journey still before them. The mission's weathered gate creaked as Noel led the mule through the churchyard. Snow crunched beneath their feet, and lamplight spilled from the windows, casting warm rectangles on the pristine drifts. Before they reached the steps, the heavy wooden door swung open, framing a tall woman wrapped in a thick shawl. "Lord above, what brings travelers out on such a bitter night?" Her voice carried both concern and strength. She stepped forward, holding a tin lantern high. "I'm Clara Dunn, circuit preacher for these parts." Noel hesitated, recognition flickering in his eyes. He'd known another Dunn once, years ago. "Noel Keller," he said simply. "The boy's hurt. We need shelter till morning." Clara's eyes widened slightly at his name, but she quickly turned her attention to Tay. "You poor child, you're nearly frozen. Come inside, both of you. There's soup on the stove and a fire in the hearth." She helped Tay down from the mule, supporting him as he limped toward the door. Noel followed after securing the animal in a small stable attached to the church. The mission's main room was plain but welcoming, with rough-hewn benches pushed against the walls to create living space. A pot-bellied stove radiated heat, and the aroma of beans and cornbread filled the air. Clara guided Tay to a chair close to the fire. "Let me look at that leg," she said, gently rolling up his trouser. Her hands moved with practiced care as she examined the healing wound. "Whoever dressed this did a fair job, but it needs fresh bandages." "Noel helped me," Tay said, watching her work. "He found me in the snow." Clara glanced at Noel, who stood awkwardly by the door, his hat in his hands. "You always did have a way of finding those who needed help, Noel Keller." She gestured to another chair. "Sit. You look dead on your feet." While she gathered medical supplies from a cabinet, Noel sank into the offered seat. The fire's warmth began to thaw his frozen bones, making him realize just how exhausted he was. Clara returned with clean bandages and a pot of salve. As she tended to Tay's leg, she spoke softly. "I knew your wife, Sarah. We were close friends before." She paused, concentrating on her work. "She taught me everything I know about healing, said I had the touch for it." Noel's throat tightened at Sarah's name. "That sounds like her," he managed. "She was proud of your work with the Army Scouts," Clara continued, wrapping the bandage with gentle efficiency. "Said you helped protect both settlers and native families, kept the peace when you could." "That was a long time ago." Noel's voice was rough with memory. Clara finished with Tay's leg and stood, brushing off her skirts. "Time for some supper. You both look half-starved." She moved to the stove, returning with bowls of beans and thick slices of cornbread. The simple food tasted like heaven after days of trail rations. Tay ate quickly, his young body demanding nourishment despite his fatigue. As they finished their meal, Clara gathered the empty bowls. "I should tell you," she said quietly. "This mission has become something of a sanctuary. I shelter native families when I can, those fleeing the railroad men's greed." She met Noel's eyes steadily. "I've had threats, but I won't turn away those in need." "The railroad men," Noel said. "They're after the Apache Springs." Clara nodded. "Water rights. They'll stop at nothing to control the route through these mountains." She glanced at Tay. "This boy's people stand in their way." The fire popped and settled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, wind whistled around the church's eaves, but inside was warm and still. "There's a cot in the back room," Clara said to Tay. "You need rest to heal properly." The boy looked at Noel, who nodded. "Go on. We'll wake you at first light." After Clara had settled Tay in the back room, she returned with a lamp and 2 cups of coffee. She sat across from Noel, studying his face in the flickering light. "I see the anger in you," she said softly. "The grief, too. Sarah would understand, but she wouldn't want it to consume you." Noel stared into his coffee. "They shot my dog, for sport." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Then I found the boy, hurt and running. Now I learn it's all part of some scheme to steal native water rights." His hands tightened around the cup. "My tracking skills. I could hunt them down." "And then what?" Clara asked gently. "More killing? More grief?" She leaned forward. "You were given those skills for a reason, Noel. Not for vengeance, but to protect, to guide, to help those who can't help themselves." The lamp flame wavered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, an owl called into the night. "I made a vow," Noel said, "after the last campaign, never to kill again." There's a difference between killing for vengeance and standing between evil and the innocent. Clara's voice held quiet conviction. "Your skills can save lives, Noel. That boy in there trusts you to help his people. That's no small thing." They talked through the night, their voices low so as not to wake Tay. Clara spoke of her work at the mission, of the families she'd helped, of her own struggles with faith in the face of injustice. Noel found himself sharing memories of Sarah, of their life together, of the pain he'd carried alone for so long. As false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Clara rose and went to her pantry. She returned with a leather pouch filled with dried food, jerky, cornmeal, dried fruit. "For the trail," she said, pressing it into his hands. She hesitated, then added, "Let me pray for you before you go." Noel bowed his head as Clara's clear voice rose in the pre-dawn stillness, asking for protection, for guidance, for the strength to choose right over wrong. As she spoke the final Amen, Noel felt something shift inside him, a spark of faith he'd thought long extinguished. The first rays of sun were just touching the church spire as Clara stood in the doorway, watching them prepare to leave. Noel felt her eyes on him as he helped Tay mount the mule, checking the bandage one last time. "Remember what we talked about," she called softly. "You're needed, Noel Keller, not as an avenger, but as a protector." Noel touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, then turned the mule toward the trail. As they passed through the churchyard gate, he carried with him not just Clara's food and prayers, but a renewed sense of purpose, and the first stirrings of healing in his wounded heart. The morning sun cast long shadows as Noel and Tay left Clara's mission behind. Their mules' hooves crunched through crusted snow, leaving a trail that Noel knew would need covering. The boy sat wrapped in an extra blanket Clara had insisted they take, his injured leg propped carefully in the stirrup. "Grandfather," Tay said softly, using the term that now came naturally to him. "How far to the springs?" Noel studied the eastern horizon, where jagged peaks cut into the pale winter sky. 2 days, if we're careful. Less if we push hard." He didn't add that pushing hard might mean missing signs of the outlaws. Better to move slow and sure than fast and blind. They climbed steadily through the morning, following game trails that wound between snow-laden pines. Near midday, Noel reined the mule to a halt. There in the snow lay clear boot prints, deep and fresh, alongside scattered pieces of broken glass that sparkled in the wan sunlight. Dismounting, Noel crouched to examine the tracks. "Heavy boots," he murmured, more to himself than Tay. "Men carrying weight." His fingers brushed the brown glass fragments. "Whiskey bottle, still sharp-edged, recent." Tay leaned forward on the mule, his dark eyes intent. "The bad men?" Noel nodded grimly. "Same ones, I reckon." He stood, brushing snow from his knees. "We'll follow, but careful like. No noise now." They tracked the boot prints through the afternoon, Noel leading the mule on foot. The trail wound higher into the mountains, sometimes clear in fresh snow, sometimes hidden where wind had scoured the ground bare. Noel read each sign like words in a book. Here a broken branch, there a scuff mark on stone, everywhere the subtle traces that told of men moving in haste. As dusk approached, Noel guided them into a dense thicket of young pines. The branches formed a natural shelter, and the thick needles would help mask any firelight. "We'll rest here," he said, helping Tay down. "Need to set some warnings, case they double back." While Tay gathered dry twigs for a small fire, Noel worked quickly in the failing light. He strung thin cord between trees, hanging tin cups where they would clatter if disturbed. Around the perimeter, he arranged dead branches that would snap loudly under an intruder's foot. Last, he scattered loose stones in likely approach paths, natural alarms that would rattle under careless steps. They kept their fire small, just enough to warm some coffee and heat the dried meat Clara had provided. As they ate, the mountain night settled around them, deep and cold. Stars pricked through the pine boughs overhead. The first laugh caught them both by surprise, a harsh sound carrying across snow-muffled air. Tay stiffened, his hand going to the medicine pouch at his neck. Noel touched a finger to his lips, then carefully kicked snow over their tiny fire. "Stay here," he whispered. "If trouble comes, there's a hollow log behind you. Hide deep and stay quiet, no matter what you hear." Tay nodded, his young face set with determination. Noel squeezed his shoulder once, then melted into the darkness. Moving like a shadow, Noel followed the sound of voices. His moccasins made no noise on the frozen ground as he crept from tree to tree, testing each step before putting his weight down. The laughter grew louder, accompanied now by the crack and pop of larger fires. At the edge of a small clearing, Noel went still as stone. Below him, 3 campfires burned bright, their light reflecting off wagon canvas. He counted 8 men moving around the fires, passing bottles, their voices growing louder with drink. But it was what he saw behind the wagons that made his blood run cold. Huddled together in the snow sat a group of Apache women and children, maybe 15 souls in all. 2 armed men stood guard, occasionally prodding their captives with rifle barrels and laughing at their fear. Even from this distance, Noel could see the children shivering. Rage rose in him like a fever, hot and demanding. His hand moved unconsciously to his knife hilt, fingers tightening on worn leather. One silent rush down the slope, blade flashing in firelight, but no. That way led only to death, maybe not just his own. He forced his breathing to slow, made his fingers relax. These were the same men who had killed Bramble, who had shot Tay and left him for dead. The same cruel hearts that now held families captive while they drank and laughed. Justice would come. But it would come clever, not quick. Noel watched a while longer, counting weapons, noting how the men moved, marking which ones seemed most alert even in their drinking. Then he faded back into the darkness, retracing his silent path to their camp. He found Tay exactly where he'd left him, tension visible in every line of his small body. The boy's eyes asked the question before his lips could form it. "I found them," Noel said softly, settling beside him. "Your people are there, women and children. They're alive, but being held captive." Tay's hands clenched. "We must free them." "We will," Noel assured him, "but we got to be smart about it. 8 men down there, all armed. We rush in wild, people die, maybe all of us." He pulled out his knife and began checking its edge in the starlight. "Better to thin them out first. Make them scared. Divide them up where we can handle them a few at a time." Throughout the night, Noel taught Tay everything he knew about snares and deadfalls. He showed him how to bend saplings into spring-loaded traps, how to disguise trip lines with snow, how to build catch pits lined with sharpened stakes. The boy absorbed it all with fierce intensity, his clever fingers quickly learning each knot and trigger. "Remember," Noel said as he demonstrated how to set a tangle-foot snare, "we're not looking to kill, just to catch and hold. Make them use men to help their trapped friends instead of guard their prisoners." Tay nodded, his face serious as he practiced the knots. Between lessons, his hand often strayed to the medicine pouch at his neck, touching it like a talisman. Noel recognized the gesture, a reaching for strength, for connection to something larger than oneself. As false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they checked their weapons one final time. Noel had his knife and an old army Colt, loaded but held in reserve. Tay carried a sharpened staff that could serve as both walking stick and weapon. "Today we begin," Noel said quietly. "You remember what I taught you about the traps?" "Yes, grandfather," Tay replied, clutching his medicine pouch. "I remember all of it." The sun rose over the frozen ridges, painting the snow with pale gold light. Somewhere below, 8 cruel men slept off their drink, unaware that justice was being prepared, one careful knot at a time. Morning fog crept through the pines like ghostly fingers, turning the forest into a maze of shifting shadows. Noel crouched behind a frost-covered boulder, studying the outlaw camp below through the murky dawn light. Beside him, Tay gripped his walking staff, breath coming in small white puffs. "Remember," Noel whispered, "once I spook their horses, you wait 3 breaths, then trigger those log snares. Not before." He squeezed the boy's shoulder. "You sure you can reach them all?" Tay nodded solemnly. "I remember where each rope is tied, grandfather. Like you showed me." The outlaws' camp stirred with early movement. 2 men poked at dying fires while others still snored in bedrolls. The captive Apache families huddled together, watched by a guard who swayed with exhaustion. Near the wagons, a dozen horses stamped restlessly in the morning chill. Noel touched the medicine pouch Tay had given him for luck, then began his silent descent. He moved like water through the fog, placing each foot with the care of a lifetime spent hunting. The horses sensed him first, ears pricking forward, nostrils flaring. He paused, letting them settle, then crept closer. The deadfall trap was simple but effective, a carefully balanced pile of logs and rocks held back by a single trigger rope. Noel reached it unseen, knife ready. Above, he knew Tay watched, counting breaths. With one swift slice, he cut the rope. The crash shattered the morning silence. Logs and stones thundered down the slope, sending the horses into panic. They reared and bucked, breaking their ties, scattering in all directions through the fog. Men shouted in confusion, scrambling from bedrolls. "The horses! Catch them, horses!" someone yelled. 3 breaths passed. Right on time, Tay released his snares. More logs, previously bound on the slope, rolled into camp like wooden thunder. They smashed through the remaining fires, crushed empty bedrolls, and sent men diving for cover. Confusion turned to chaos. Noel burst from the fog like a mountain lion, swift and sure. His knife flashed once, cutting the ropes that bound the Apache captives. "Run!" he commanded in their tongue. "Head east, through the thick fog!" Women grabbed children, fleeing into the mist while the outlaws still stumbled in confusion. The exhausted guard reached for his rifle, but Noel's fist found his jaw first, dropping him cold. "There! By the wagons!" A rifle cracked, the bullet splintering wood near Noel's head. He dove and rolled, coming up behind a wagon wheel. More shots rang out, wild and panicked. Through gaps in the fog, Noel glimpsed Tay releasing the last log snares. They rumbled down, forcing the outlaws to scatter further. "Good boy," Noel thought proudly. "Just like we planned." "Pull back," a voice shouted. Cal Briggs' voice, Noel realized. "Into the trees! Regroup at the creek!" Boots crunched on snow as the outlaws retreated, still firing blindly through the fog. Noel stayed low, counting shots, waiting until the firing slowed. When silence fell, broken only by distant shouts, he whistled 3 times, the signal for Tay. The boy appeared like a shadow through the mist. "The families?" he asked urgently. "Safe, headed east." Noel clasped his shoulder. "You did well, boy. Those logs scattered them proper." They worked quickly, gathering what supplies they could from the abandoned camp. Food, blankets, an extra rifle. The fog began thinning as the morning warmed, so they hurried east on the trail of the fleeing families. They found them an hour later, resting in a sheltered hollow. Women wept with joy at seeing Tay, embracing him, touching his face as if to prove he was real. Children clung to their mothers, eyes still wide with fear, but beginning to show hope. "The springs are safe," Noel assured them in halting Apache. "Those men won't trouble you there, not now." He didn't add that the outlaws would likely regroup and return. That was a worry for another day. By midday, they had a proper camp established in a defensible spot. Noel showed some of the women how to set simple alarm triggers around the perimeter, while others tended small cooking fires. The children's fear gradually gave way to curiosity about this quiet white man who spoke to them gently and knew their ways. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Noel caught 2 rabbits in his snares. The meat roasted slowly over the coals, filling the camp with savory smells. He watched Tay move among his people, proud and concerned by turns, So young, yet carrying such responsibility. For the first time since Bramble's death, Noel felt something loosen in his chest. Not peace exactly, but perhaps its beginning. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it felt less sharp somehow. Doing right by these people, protecting the innocent, it helped ease the burden of loss. That evening, as stars began pricking through the darkening sky, Noel found himself speaking aloud the prayers his wife had taught him long ago. Tay sat close beside him, adding his own soft chants in Apache. Their words mingled and rose with the smoke, two traditions reaching toward the same heaven. Neither of them saw the cold eyes watching from the shadows beyond the firelight. Cal Brigg crouched in the darkness, his face tight with fury as he observed the peaceful scene. His fingers worked restlessly on his rifle stock, but he held his rage in check. Not yet, not while they were alert and watching, but soon. "Enjoy your victory, old man," he whispered, his words lost in the night wind. "It won't last." Then he melted away into the forest, leaving only disturbed snow and the promise of violence to come. Inside the fire's warm circle, Noel added another log to the flames. The Apache families were settling for the night, wrapped in salvaged blankets. Tay leaned against him, drowsy but still alert, his medicine pouch clutched tight. Together they watched the fire dance, while overhead stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unknowing and eternal. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale strokes of pink and gold as Noel helped the Apache families break camp. Children wrapped themselves in blankets against the morning chill, while mothers packed what little they had salvaged from the Outlaws' camp. Tay moved among them, translating Noel's instructions with quiet confidence. "We'll follow the deer trails," Noel explained, pointing west toward distant ridges. "Slower going, but safer than the main path." He studied the sky, gauging the weather. "Should reach the mission by nightfall, God willing." They had 2 wagons they'd recovered, not enough for everyone to ride, but suitable for the elderly and smallest children. Noel hitched his mule to one, while 2 strong Apache women took turns driving the other. The rest would walk, forming a line that stretched like beads on a thread through the winter landscape. Progress was indeed slow. The deer trails wound between patches of deep snow and frozen creek beds, requiring careful navigation. Noel led from the front, scanning constantly for signs of pursuit. Every few hours, they stopped to rest the children and share water from leather canteens. By midday, the sun had warmed the air enough to soften the snow, making the going even harder as wheels sank into the wet surface. Noel found himself helping push wagons free of deep spots, his shoulders aching with the effort. Yet no one complained. These people knew hardship, knew the price of survival. Tay limped beside him, his wounded leg still troubling him, but his spirit undiminished. "The little ones are tired," he said softly. "But they trust you, grandfather. They say you move like Brother Bear, strong but careful." Noel grunted, touched by the children's faith. "Tell them we're more than halfway there. Clara's mission has warm fires and soft beds waiting." The afternoon wore on, shadows lengthening across the snow. Noel recognized landmarks now, a lightning-split pine, a distinctive rock formation that resembled a sleeping buffalo. They were entering familiar territory, land he'd hunted in younger days. Just as dusk began creeping through the trees, the mission's cross came into view, silhouetted against the purpling sky. Smoke rose from its stone chimney, promising warmth and shelter. A few of the children pointed and whispered excitedly. Clara must have posted lookouts, for she emerged from the mission before they reached the yard. She wore a thick shawl against the evening chill, her gray hair neat beneath a knitted cap. Her face showed nothing but welcome as she approached the weary travelers. "Praise be," she said, embracing the nearest woman. "Come in, all of you. We've soup on the stove and plenty of blankets." The mission's main hall glowed with lamplight and wood smoke. Clara had clearly prepared for their arrival. Pallets lined the walls, and a huge pot of bean soup simmered on the cook stove. From somewhere deeper in the building came the soft sound of hymn singing, other refugees already sheltering here, their voices rising in gentle harmony. "Bless you, Clara," Noel said quietly as she passed him a tin cup of hot coffee. "Taking in so many." "The Lord provides," she replied simply. Then, lower, "Though I won't pretend it's been easy. Railroad men came by twice last month, making threats. Said they'd burn us out if we kept harboring Injuns." She spat the slur like it tasted bitter. "I told them God's house turns none away." Noel watched as she moved among the newcomers, offering food and comfort with equal measure. Her strength showed not in force but in unwavering compassion. The Apache families responded to her genuine warmth, accepting her help without the wariness they typically showed white folks. As the evening deepened, the mission hall filled with the sounds of life: children's laughter, murmured conversations, the clink of spoons against bowls. Lanterns cast pools of golden light, creating islands of warmth in the growing darkness. For a moment, it seemed they had found true sanctuary. But something prickled at the back of Noel's neck, an old hunter's instinct that wouldn't let him rest. While others settled in for the night, he slipped outside, rifle cradled in his arms. The yard lay silent under a rising moon, snow reflecting enough light to cast blue shadows. Noel moved carefully along the mission's perimeter, reading the ground like a book. Near the tree line, he found what he'd feared: fresh boot prints, at least 6 different sets, all made since the last snowfall. More disturbing was their pattern. These weren't the tracks of casual travelers or curious locals. They circled the mission deliberately, studying its layout. Some prints showed men had stood watching for long periods, evidenced by the deeper impressions and scattered tobacco shreds. When he returned inside, Clara was waiting by the door. Her face told him she'd already guessed what he'd found. "They're getting bolder," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter. "Used to just pass through, make their threats and leave. Now they watch." "Wait," Noel nodded grimly. "Briggs' work. He's not one to let go of a grudge, and we humiliated him proper." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe you should consider moving these folks somewhere safer. Another mission, perhaps." Clara's spine straightened, her chin lifting with quiet determination. "This is God's house, Noel Keller. I won't abandon it to men who twist the Lord's word to justify their greed." She touched the cross hanging at her throat. "Besides, where would they go? Every mission for 100 miles is facing the same pressure. Someone has to make a stand." Through the window, Noel could see Tay helping younger children arrange their bedding, showing the same gentle patience Clara displayed. The boy caught his eye and nodded, understanding passing between them without words. Noel tightened the strap on his rifle, feeling its familiar weight. "Then we'll need to be ready. Brig won't wait long. It's not in his nature." Outside, snow began falling again, thick flakes drifting down in the stillness. They gathered on the window glass, obscuring the view of the valley below. The soft hymns continued from deeper in the mission, but now they seemed more like a defiant prayer than simple praise. Clara laid a weathered hand on Noel's arm. "You've already done so much, bringing these people to safety. No one would blame you for moving on." Noel watched the snow fall, remembering Bramble's death, remembering his vow of peace. But he also remembered Tay's trust, Clara's courage, the children's faces bright with hope. Sometimes a man had to choose between his vows and what was right. "I reckon I'll stay a spell," he said quietly. "Someone needs to watch your back while you're busy doing the Lord's work." Clara's smile was grateful, but knowing. Together they stood at the window, watching darkness and snow wrap the valley in silence, while behind them, the mission's hall glowed with warmth and life and borrowed time. The mission's great room lay quiet in the pre-dawn darkness. Only the soft breathing of sleeping refugees and the occasional pop from the dying fire broke the silence. Clara rose from her small cot near the stove, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. The coals needed stoking if breakfast was to be ready when the children woke. She had just lifted the heavy iron poker when the door burst open with a crash. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the mission hall as Cal Brigg and his men stormed in, revolvers glinting in the dim light. Screams erupted as people jolted awake. Children cried out in terror while mothers tried to shield them. Two outlaws seized Clara's arms before she could react, the poker clattering to the floor. She struggled against their grip, but they dragged her toward the door, boots scraping across the wooden planks. "Let her go!" Noel's voice thundered from across the room. He lunged forward, but three of Brigg's men intercepted him. The first swing caught him in the jaw, snapping his head back. The second blow drove into his ribs, and the third sent him crashing to his knees. Blood trickled from his split lip as he tried to rise again. Brigg stepped forward, boots clicking on the floorboards. "Stay down, old man, unless you want to watch her die right here." His revolver pressed against Clara's temple, and she went very still. Dawn's first gray light filtered through the windows as they hauled Clara outside. The other outlaws kept their guns trained on the huddled refugees, daring anyone to move. Noel lay where he had fallen, one hand pressed to his bleeding side, hatred burning in his eyes. "Listen well," Brigg called from the doorway. "That treaty map the boy carries? Bring it to Devil's Creek by sunset tomorrow." His voice dropped to a cruel whisper. "Or the good preacher woman burns with her precious mission." He smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Your choice, Keller." The door slammed shut. Through the thin walls came the sound of horses' hooves, then Clara's muffled cry as they forced her to mount. The beating of hooves faded into the distance, leaving behind a terrible silence. Noel pushed himself up slowly, every breath sending daggers through his ribs. His vision swam, but he forced himself to stand. Rage boiled inside him, threatening to overflow. His hands shook with it. "Grandfather." Tay's quiet voice cut through the haze of fury. The boy stood beside him, one hand steadying Noel's arm. His lips moved in an Apache prayer, the words flowing like water over stones. Around them, the mission survivors huddled together, fear plain on their faces. Some wept quietly. Others stared at the broken door as if expecting the outlaws to return at any moment. The children clung to their mothers, too frightened even to cry. Noel limped to his gear, stored carefully in the corner. His old rifle lay wrapped in oiled cloth, untouched for years. His hands remembered its weight as he unwrapped it, checking the action with practiced movements. Next came his hunting knife, still sharp despite its long rest. Each item spoke of his former life. Tracker, hunter, killer. "I'm going after them," he said, voice hard as iron. "All of them." His vow against killing lay in pieces, shattered like the mission's door. Tay watched him gather supplies, ammunition, dried meat, water. "The spirits say revenge darkens the heart," he said softly, "but justice lights the path." Noel paused in his preparations. The boy's words struck something deep within him, some truth he had almost forgotten. He thought of Clara's unwavering faith, her gentle strength in the face of threats. What would she say about the fury coursing through his veins? As dusk approached, Noel stepped out into the gathering snow. He made his way to the small rise where he had buried Bramble, the frozen ground still showing signs of that bitter day. Kneeling beside the crude marker, he bowed his head. "Lord," he whispered, "give me strength for what must be done. But let it be mercy, not rage, that guides my hand." Snow fell silently around him, coating his shoulders in white. "Help me remember what Clara taught, that even the darkest heart might find redemption." The prayer steadied him, cooled the burning in his blood. He would hunt Brigg and his men, yes, but not as an agent of vengeance. He would do what needed doing to protect the innocent, nothing more. Rising from Bramble's grave, Noel saw Tay waiting at the mission door. The boy held his medicine pouch, the treaty map safe inside. Their eyes met across the snowy yard, and understanding passed between them. Together they would find Clara. Together they would face whatever came. The snow thickened as night drew near, erasing tracks and softening edges. But Noel's skills remained sharp, despite the years of disuse. He would track Brig through this storm and any other. Clara's life depended on it. Inside the mission, lanterns glowed warmly, and the broken door had been temporarily repaired. The refugees gathered their courage, preparing for a long night of waiting and prayer. Their faith, like Clara's, remained unshaken even in darkness. Noel checked his rifle one final time, each movement deliberate and controlled. The weapon no longer felt foreign in his hands, but neither did it feel like surrender to his old ways. This time he chose to take it up not for death, but for life, for protection, for justice. The mission bell tolled the hour, its clear tone carrying across the snow-hushed valley. Somewhere out there, Clara waited. Somewhere out there, Brig plotted his next move. And here, between mission and wilderness, Noel Keller prepared to become once more the hunter he had tried to forget. The eastern sky had barely begun to pale when Noel shouldered his pack. Fresh snow had fallen through the night, but the Outlaws' trail still showed clear. Deep gouges where horses had plowed through drifts, broken branches where riders had passed. Even after years away from tracking, Noel read the signs as easily as words on a page. Tay stood beside him at the mission's edge, steam rising from a cup of hot coffee Clara had shown him how to brew. The boy's injured leg had healed enough for steady walking, though he still favored it slightly. His medicine pouch hung secure against his chest, the precious treaty map safe inside. "They're moving slow," Noel said, kneeling to examine a hoof print. "Horses struggling in the deep snow? That works to our advantage." He traced the edge of the track with weathered fingers. "See how the snow's crystallized here? Tells us exactly when they passed." Tay crouched beside him, dark eyes intent on every detail. "Like reading the bark of trees," he said softly. "The marks tell stories." Noel nodded, pleased at the boy's understanding. "That's right. Nature speaks to those who know how to listen." He straightened, adjusting his rifle strap. Time we were moving. They set out as the sun crested the eastern ridge, their boots crunching through fresh powder. Noel set a careful pace, mindful of Tay's leg and the need to conserve strength. Every half hour they paused to check their surroundings and listen for pursuit. The winter forest lay silent except for the occasional crack of frost-heavy branches. By mid-morning, they stopped in a sheltered hollow to warm themselves. Noel built a small fire, feeding it dry twigs that produced little smoke. They shared a meal of dried beans and jerky from their packs, warming their hands over the flames. "Watch how I build this fire," Noel instructed, demonstrating how to arrange the kindling. Small and hot burns cleaner than large and smoky, harder for others to spot. He pulled his coat tighter against the chill. Every skill matters out here. While they ate, Noel continued teaching. He showed Tay how to spot game trails beneath the snow, how to read the way wind-bent twigs pointed toward water sources, how broken brush revealed the height and weight of passing riders. The boy absorbed every lesson eagerly, his quick mind making connections that impressed even Noel. "You have good eyes," Noel said, as they doused the fire and resumed their trek. "Sharp eyes see what others miss. That's how we'll catch them." They followed the outlaw trail through stands of snow-laden pine, across frozen meadows where deer had recently passed. By early afternoon, the ground began to rise. Ahead loomed a narrow gorge, its steep walls channeling the wind into bitter gusts. Noel held up his hand, signaling a halt. "Look there," he whispered, pointing to where an avalanche had partially filled the gorge. Fresh snow hung precariously on the slopes above. "Nature's given us a weapon." Understanding dawned in Tay's eyes. "Like the deadfall traps we used before." "Just so," Noel studied the terrain carefully. But bigger, much bigger. He unslung his rifle and began climbing the western slope, motioning for Tay to follow. We'll need to work fast. For the next hour, they prepared their ambush. Noel showed Tay how to identify support points in the snowpack, where a single disturbance could trigger a controlled slide. They positioned themselves on a stable ledge with clear views of the gorge below. "Listen," Noel whispered suddenly. Far below, the sound of horses and men echoed off the canyon walls. Right on schedule. The first riders appeared at the gorge's entrance, scouts checking the path ahead. Behind them came the main group, moving cautiously through the half-buried trail. Noel counted 8 men. In the middle of the column rode Clara, bound but sitting straight in the saddle. Brig brought up the rear, his face dark with impatience. Noel waited until the entire party had entered the gorge. His rifle cracked once, the shot striking a precise point in the snowpack. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like thunder, the slope gave way. Snow cascaded down both sides of the gorge, a white wall that scattered horses and riders. Shouts of alarm turned to cries of panic as mounts reared and bucked. 2 outlaws were swept from their saddles, carried helplessly in the tumbling snow. When the slide settled, chaos reigned below. Horses thrashed in deep drifts, while men struggled to keep their feet. Noel was already moving, sliding down a protected route he had noted earlier. He reached the first stunned outlaw before the man could draw his revolver. A swift strike with his rifle butt ended any resistance. The second man fared no better, toppling unconscious into the snow. Noel bound them both with rawhide strips from his pack, his movements swift and precise. Not a single shot fired, yet 2 enemies disabled. From his position above, Tay watched in amazement. Noel moved like a hunting cat, each action purposeful and deadly efficient. This was not the quiet man who had tended his wound and shared Bible verses. This was the legendary scout, the hunter whose skills had once made him feared throughout the territory. But even as Noel secured the prisoners, Brig and the others were regrouping. They had lost horses and men, but still held Clara. Their leader's voice carried clearly in the cold air as he rallied his remaining gang. "Push through!" Brig shouted, fury evident in his tone. "Don't let them split us up!" The sound of gunfire echoed off the canyon walls as the outlaws shot blindly at the slopes above. Noel was already retreating, using the confusion to slip away unseen. He rejoined Tay at their previous position, his breathing steady despite the exertion. Below, Brig's men finally broke free of the gorge, their numbers reduced but their hostage still secure. As dusk approached, Noel led them to a sheltered camp beside a frozen creek. They built another small fire, its flames casting dancing shadows on snow-covered banks. In the distance, they could hear Brig's men calling to each other as they made their own camp. "You moved like smoke down there," Tay said quietly, respect clear in his voice. "Never seen anything like it." Noel stared into the fire, his face grave. "There's things I hoped never to teach anyone," he said. "Skills I wanted to forget." He looked up at Tay, his eyes hard as steel in the firelight. "But tomorrow we strike again, and you need to understand how—" The boy nodded solemnly, knowing he was being offered knowledge that came with great responsibility. Together they listened to the night sounds, the creek ice cracking in the cold, the far-off shouts of their enemies, the wind sighing through pine boughs heavy with snow. Tomorrow would bring another battle. But tonight, teacher and student sat quietly by their small fire, preparing themselves for what must be done. Dawn crept over the frozen forest, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. Noel and Tay moved like shadows through the trees, their footsteps silent on the crusty snow. They had been tracking Brig's remaining men since first light, following a trail of broken branches and scattered campfire ashes. Noel paused, his weathered hand raised in warning. Ahead, an outlaw stumbled through deep drifts, clearly separated from his companions. The man's boots dragged heavily, exhaustion evident in every step. Without a word, Noel gestured for Tay to circle left while he moved right, their movements as coordinated as hunting wolves. The morning air hung crisp and still as they closed their trap. Noel worked swiftly, setting a snare along the likely path, while Tay scattered stones to guide their quarry. Minutes later, a startled cry split the silence. The outlaw thrashed in the snow, legs tangled in Noel's expertly placed rope. Before the man could shout for help, Noel emerged from the trees like a spirit, rifle steady. "Not a sound," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. The outlaw's face went pale. "Please," he whimpered. "I got kids back home. Didn't want any of this killing." Noel studied him for a long moment, remembering Clara's words about mercy. With practiced efficiency, he bound the man's hands with rawhide strips. "Your children need a living father," he said quietly. "Not a dead killer." Tay watched from the shadows, his dark eyes wide with surprise. When they'd secured their prisoner and hidden him in a shallow cave, the boy spoke softly. "You could have killed him. Why didn't you?" "Taking life should never be easy," Noel answered, checking his rifle's action. "Man who kills without thought becomes less than human." He gazed at the boy. "Remember that." They moved on, following tracks that led deeper into the timber. By midday, they had separated 2 more outlaws from the main group. One they caught in a deadfall trap, the other when Noel spooked his horse into throwing him. Both times Noel chose restraint over revenge. "You are stronger than them," Tay said as they paused to rest. "They kill because they're weak inside. You spare lives because you're strong." Noel's weathered face softened at the boy's words. "Strength isn't in the trigger finger," he said, touching his heart. "It's in here." The afternoon sun cast long shadows when they finally located Briggs' makeshift camp. Near a frozen pond stood a ramshackle line shack, its weathered boards barely holding together. 2 armed men lounged outside, passing a bottle between them. From their hidden position, Noel and Tay could hear faint singing drifting through the shack's cracks. Clara's voice, thin but unwavering, carried familiar hymn verses into the winter air. Even as a prisoner, she clung to her faith. Noel's jaw tightened as he studied the situation. He motioned Tay closer, speaking in barely a whisper. "We'll take them together. Watch how I move, then mirror it on the far side." They separated, circling the clearing like mountain lions stalking prey. Noel waited until both guards lifted the bottle, then gave his signal, a perfect imitation of a chickadee's call. They struck simultaneously. Noel emerged behind one guard, the rifle butt connecting precisely with the base of the man's skull. Tay, showing skills learned from days of observation, tangled the other man's feet with a snare line. Before either guard could cry out, both lay unconscious in the snow. Noel reached the shack's door in 3 long strides, easing it open with practiced care. Clara sat bound to a chair, her face pale but composed. When she saw Noel, tears filled her eyes. "I knew you'd come," she whispered as he cut her bonds. "I never stopped believing." Her legs were too weak to hold her, and she collapsed into Noel's arms. He held her gently, supporting her weight while Tay brought water from their canteen. Together they helped her to drink. "Can you ride?" Noel asked softly, noting how she trembled with exhaustion. Clara nodded, her determination evident despite her weakness. "Just help me mount up. I won't slow you down." They found the guards' horses tethered behind the shack. After securing the unconscious men, they helped Clara into the saddle of the steadier mount. As dusk approached, they made camp in a sheltered hollow, far enough from the shack to be safe from discovery. Noel built a small fire, screening it carefully to hide the light. Clara sat close to the flames, color slowly returning to her cheeks as she warmed herself. Tay wrapped her in one of their spare blankets, his young face full of concern. "What about Brig?" Clara asked finally, her voice stronger. "He's still out there, still threatening my mission and Tay's people." Noel checked his rifle, his movements deliberate. "He'll face justice," he said firmly. "Not slaughter, but proper justice. I won't let him destroy everything you've built, everything you believe in." Clara reached out, touching his arm. "Your heart has grown stronger than your gun," she said softly. "That's what I've been praying for." The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing upward into the darkness. Noel kept his rifle close, knowing Brig would not give up easily. But Clara's quiet faith filled the hollow like a warm breath, strengthening his resolve to end this without becoming what he once was. Tay leaned against a fallen log, his young face thoughtful in the firelight. "3 paths lie ahead," he said in the way of his people. "Death's path, mercy's path, and justice's path. You chose well today, grandfather." Noel nodded, understanding the wisdom in the boy's words. The rifle lay ready across his knees, but it was no longer his only answer. Clara's rescue had shown him another way, one that honored both his skill and his soul. They shared a simple meal of dried meat and hard bread, letting the fire's warmth ease their tired muscles. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had won something more precious than victory. They had kept faith with who they were meant to be. The stars wheeled overhead, bright and cold in the winter sky. Noel kept watch while Clara and Tay slept, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond their sanctuary. His trigger finger remained steady, but his heart was steadier still. Dawn broke cold and clear as the small group began their journey toward the Apache Springs. Clara rode the borrowed horse, her strength slowly returning, while Noel led on foot. Behind them, the rescued families trudged through deep snow, their faces set with determination despite their weariness. Tay limped beside Noel, his injured leg still troubling him, but his eyes remained sharp as he guided them along hidden paths. The boy's knowledge of the land proved invaluable, showing them sheltered routes where the wind cut less fiercely. "The springs lie 2 ridges east," Tay said, pointing toward distant peaks. "My people have guarded them since before my grandfather's time." The winter sun offered little warmth as they pressed forward. Noel watched the refugees carefully, noting their flagging energy. When he spotted a protected hollow near midday, he called for rest. "We'll warm ourselves here," he announced, helping Clara down from her mount. "No sense pushing too hard in this cold?" They gathered dried wood, and soon 3 small fires burned in the hollow. The families huddled close to the flames, sharing what little food remained. Clara moved among them, offering quiet words of encouragement and prayer. As evening approached, they made camp in a dense stand of pines. The trees provided shelter from the biting wind, and Noel set the younger men to gathering branches for bedding. The smell of pine sap filled the air as they worked. After a simple supper of dried beans and the last of their bread, the refugees settled around the fires. Children's eyes grew heavy, and mothers tucked them close beneath shared blankets. The mood was somber until Tay spoke up. "Grandfather," he said to Noel, "tell us about your dog Bramble. Was he a good hunter?" A hush fell over the camp. Everyone had heard about Noel's slain companion, but few dared speak of him. Noel was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. Then, surprising them all, he smiled. "My first hunt with Bramble," he began, his voice soft with memory, "was on a day much like this one. Cold enough to freeze your thoughts solid." The children sat up straighter, eyes bright with interest. Even the adults leaned closer as Noel continued. "That dog was just a pup then, all legs and enthusiasm. Didn't know much about tracking, but his heart was pure gold. We were after elk, though I reckon Bramble would have been happy chasing butterflies." Quiet laughter rippled through the group. Noel's weathered face softened as he spoke. "We found tracks near sunset, when most hunters would have turned back. But Bramble got that look in his eye, the one that said he wasn't quitting. Led me straight to a bull elk bedded down in a thicket. That dog had natural wisdom about him, even then. "Did you get the elk?" a child asked eagerly. Noel shook his head, chuckling. Bramble got so excited he started yipping and dancing around, scared that elk halfway to Sunday. But you know what? Watching that pup's joy at just being alive, that was worth more than any hunt. More stories followed, shared by others around the fires. Tales of faithful dogs, of homes left behind, of hope for tomorrow. For a brief time, the weight of their situation lifted, replaced by the warmth of shared memories. Clara watched Noel as he spoke, noting how the telling eased something in him. When the stories finally wound down and families began settling for sleep, she moved to sit beside him. "You gave them a gift tonight," she said softly. "Sometimes a good story feeds the soul better than bread." Noel nodded, his eyes distant. Bramble would have liked these people. He always knew good hearts from bad. They sat in comfortable silence until Tay approached, clutching his medicine pouch. "The springs are not far now," he said, his young face serious. "But I saw smoke on the ridge before dark. Many fires." "Brig," Noel confirmed grimly. "He's already there, waiting for us." Clara touched his arm gently. "What will you do?" Noel studied the terrain ahead, barely visible in the starlight. "There's a high point overlooking the springs. I'll scout at first light, find their weaknesses." His hand tightened on his rifle. "But I'm afraid, Clara. Afraid of what I might do when I face him." "Afraid of becoming the killer you once were?" she asked quietly. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Rage is a powerful thing. Been holding it back since Bramble died, but seeing Brig again." He left the thought unfinished. Clara took his calloused hand between her own. "Let's pray together," she suggested, "not for victory or vengeance, but for wisdom." They bowed their heads as Clara's clear voice rose softly in prayer. "Lord, guide his hands toward justice, not revenge. Let mercy be his strength, as you have shown mercy to us all." Tay joined them, adding his own prayers in Apache, the words flowing like water over stones. The three remained together under the vast sky, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Snow began falling as they finished, large flakes drifting silently through the pines. Noel watched them settle on Clara's shawl, on Tay's dark hair, on the ground where tomorrow's tracks would tell their story. "Get some rest," he told them finally. "Dawn comes early, and we'll need clear heads." As Clara and Tay moved toward their bedrolls, Noel remained by the dying fire. He cleaned his rifle with practiced care, each movement measured and precise. The weapon was a tool, he reminded himself, not an answer. Tomorrow would test not just his aim, but his soul. The snow continued falling through the night, adding another layer to the deep drifts. Noel took first watch, his mind working through possible approaches to the springs. He had tracked men like Brig before, had killed without hesitation. But Clara's prayers echoed in his thoughts, offering a different path. Near midnight, Tay relieved him at watch. The boy moved with growing confidence despite his injury, showing strength beyond his years. Noel felt a surge of pride, tempered by concern for what lay ahead. "Sleep well, grandfather," Tay whispered. "Tomorrow we fight for the springs, but tonight the snow makes everything clean." Noel nodded, understanding the wisdom in those words. As he settled into his blankets, the gentle sound of falling snow filled the darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, but for now, there was peace in the quiet forest and the knowledge that they faced it together. Dawn crept over the mountains in streaks of pale gold. Noel stood at the head of their group, studying the terrain ahead through eyes narrowed against the glare of snow. Behind him, the refugees huddled close, their breath forming clouds in the bitter morning air. "This way," he whispered, gesturing toward a sheltered path that wound up the ridge. Step where I step. Quiet now. One by one, they followed his lead. Clara helped the elderly, while Tay guided the children, showing them how to move silently through the deep snow. The boy's injured leg had stiffened overnight, but determination kept him moving. As they climbed higher, the sound of voices carried up from below. Briggs' camp sprawled across the valley floor, dark figures moving between canvas tents and smoking fires. Noel counted at least 15 men, their horses stamping restlessly in the cold. At the ridge's crest, Noel motioned everyone to stop. They crouched behind a natural wall of rock and twisted pine. Below them lay the sacred springs, their waters still flowing despite the winter's grip. Steam rose from the surface, a beacon in the frozen landscape. "Tay," Noel called softly, "help me set the snares." Together they worked quickly, rigging deadfalls and rope traps along likely escape routes. Noel's hands moved with practiced skill, showing Tay how to disguise their work beneath fresh snow. "The mountain will help us," Tay said, touching his medicine pouch. "The spirits are angry at those who would steal the sacred waters." Noel nodded, seeing how the recent snow clung precariously to steep slopes. "Nature offers her own justice," he agreed. "We'll use that." When the traps were set, Noel gathered dry branches and pine needles, placing them strategically around the outlaw camp's perimeter. Clara watched him work, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You mean to drive them like cattle?" she said quietly. "Like game," Noel corrected. "Up into the snares, away from the springs." He checked his rifle, then turned to address the group. "When the fires start, keep the children close. Watch for my signal." The sun climbed higher, warming the snow. Noel waited until the breeze shifted, then struck his flint. The first fire caught quickly, sending smoke curling through the trees. More fires followed, carefully placed to create a wall of flame and smoke. Shouts of alarm rose from the camp. Men scrambled for weapons and horses, but the fires had been set to cut off their easiest escape routes. Panic spread as rapidly as the flames. "There!" Tay pointed to where 3 outlaws fled straight into a deadfall. The trap sprung perfectly, dropping a net of heavy logs that drove them to their knees. Noel moved like a shadow through the chaos, disarming and binding each fallen man. The mountains themselves seemed to join the fight. As frightened horses charged up steep slopes, their weight triggered small avalanches. Snow cascaded down, blocking paths and scattering riders. Near the springs, ice melt had swollen a narrow creek. 2 outlaws, trying to cross, were swept off their feet by the rushing water. They clawed their way to shore, only to find Noel waiting with rope ready. "Mercy," one gasped through chattering teeth. "We surrender." Noel bound them efficiently, adding them to his growing line of captives. He drove them ahead of him like game, using their presence to draw out others hiding in the rocks. Clara organized the refugees to guard the secured prisoners, while Tay tracked those who had slipped away. The boy's skills proved invaluable. Twice he spotted men trying to circle behind them, allowing Noel to cut off their escape. By midday, most of Briggs' gang had been captured. They sat sullenly in the snow, watching as their former captives now stood guard over them. But Brigg himself remained elusive. "There," Tay said suddenly, pointing to movement near the springs. "He goes to poison the waters." Rage surged through Noel's veins as he saw Brigg standing at the spring's edge, a barrel of mining waste beside him. Without conscious thought, Noel raised his rifle, finger tightening on the trigger. Brigg turned, sneering. "Going to shoot me, old man? Like we shot your mongrel dog?" The rifle sight settled on Briggs' chest. Noel's hands were steady, his breathing calm. One squeeze would end it all, would avenge Bramble, would protect the springs forever. "Grandfather," Tay's voice cut through the haze of hatred. The boy limped forward, placing himself between Noel and Brigg. "Remember what you taught me about Bramble's heart? How he knew good from evil?" Noel's finger trembled on the trigger. Your dog died protecting, Tay continued softly. He would want you to protect also, not destroy. The boy touched his medicine pouch. The Great Spirit sees all. Justice will come in its own way. Tears froze on Noel's cheeks as memories of Bramble flooded back. Not the moment of death, but the countless acts of loyalty and love that had gone before. The gentle way the dog had greeted strangers, his patience with children, his unfailing trust in goodness. Even the worst sinner may find redemption, Clara's voice added. She had moved to stand beside him, her hand gentle on his arm. Choose life, Noel. Choose mercy. Slowly, fighting against every instinct for revenge, Noel lowered his rifle. Brig started to laugh, but the sound died in his throat as 4 Apache hunters emerged from the trees behind him, arrows nocked and ready. You are finished here, Tay announced proudly. The springs are protected now, not by death, but by life. They bound Brig securely, adding him to the line of captured outlaws. As Clara's arms encircled Noel in a fierce embrace, he felt the weight of hatred finally leave his heart. You chose well, she whispered against his shoulder. You chose life over death, just as Bramble would have wanted. Noel held her close, feeling the warmth of her tears through his coat. Around them, the mountain air sparkled with ice crystals, and the sacred springs flowed on, their waters pure and untouched, a testament to the power of mercy over vengeance. 3 days passed like whispers across the snow-laden valley. The morning sun cast long shadows through the mission's frosted windows as Noel tended the stove, adding pine logs that snapped and crackled in the growing warmth. Outside, horses' hooves thundered against frozen ground, drawing everyone to the windows. The marshals, Clara breathed, relief softening her tired features. They got my telegram. 4 federal marshals rode into the mission yard, their badges gleaming against dark wool coats. Behind them, a prison wagon creaked through the fresh snow, its iron bars stark against weathered wood. The lead marshal, a graying man with keen eyes, dismounted and removed his hat as Clara opened the heavy door. Ma'am, he said, nodding respectfully. I'm Marshal Thompson. Got your wire about the Brig situation. Noel stepped forward, his voice steady. The outlaws are secured in the root cellar, 15 men, including Cal Brig himself. Thompson's eyebrows rose. Quite a feat. Taking down Brig's whole gang, we've been after them for months. He studied Noel carefully. You must be Keller. Heard tell of your tracking skills from Army days. That was another life, Noel replied quietly, feeling Tay's presence beside him. The boy had barely left his side since the battle at the springs. The marshals worked efficiently, bringing up the prisoners one by one. Brig emerged last, squinting in the bright morning light. His sneer faltered when he saw the federal badges. You'll hang for what you did to those native families, Thompson said, securing heavy iron shackles around Brig's wrists. The territory's got witnesses aplenty. Noel watched silently as the outlaws were loaded into the prison wagon. Tay stood straight-backed beside him, clutching his medicine pouch. The boy's eyes never left Brig until the wagon doors clanged shut. The treaty map, Noel said, turning to Thompson. It needs to be registered properly. These springs belong to Tay's people. Thompson nodded gravely. I'll see it done myself at the territorial office. No one will threaten these waters again. Clara brought out the carefully preserved map, its official seals still intact. This land was promised to them, she said firmly. God's water flows for all his children. Indeed it does, ma'am, Thompson agreed, tucking the document safely into his coat. I'll send confirmation once it's registered. As the marshals prepared to leave, Noel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Justice would be served, not through his rifle's sight, but through law and right. The winter morning had warmed slightly when Noel finally turned to the task that had waited since that terrible night. He chose a spot beside the mission's eastern wall, where morning light would touch it first. The ground was frozen solid, but he worked steadily with pick and shovel, digging deep enough to lay Bramble's remains to rest properly. Tay helped him gather stones to line the grave, while Clara brought fresh pine boughs to lay beneath the body. Together, they carried Bramble's remains, wrapped carefully in Noel's old blanket, and lowered him gently into his final resting place. "I need to do this right," Noel said softly, taking up his knife and a piece of pine he'd selected days ago. His hands moved with careful precision as he carved, each stroke revealing letters that spoke of love and loyalty. "Bramble, faithful friend." Clara watched him work, her eyes bright with tears. "He brought you to us," she said. "Through loss, God builds new families." Noel nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. He planted the cross firmly at the head of the grave, making sure it stood straight and true. Tay placed his medicine pouch on the fresh earth. "I will sing a song of guidance," he said, "so his spirit runs happy in the eternal hunting grounds." The boy's clear voice rose in an Apache chant, floating across the snowy yard like smoke on the wind. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Clara made her way to the mission's bell tower. The bronze bell that had hung silent through the dark days now rang out clear and strong, its voice carrying hope across the valley. The sound drew everyone outside, the remaining refugees, the Apache families, the scattered settlers who had begun to return. They gathered in the mission yard as evening painted the sky in deep purples and burning golds. Clara stood between Noel and Tay, their shadows stretching long across Bramble's grave. The three of them, preacher woman, former hunter, and Apache boy, stood together as the family none of them had expected to find. "Will you stay?" Clara asked softly, her hand finding Noel's. He looked down at their joined fingers, then at Tay's hopeful face. "Reckon I've had enough of solitude," he said. "These people need a guardian more than these mountains need another hermit." Tay beamed. "You can teach the young ones to track, grandfather. Show them how to read the land's stories." "And build bridges between our peoples," Clara added. "Your heart was always meant for protecting, not killing." Inside the mission, lamps were being lit. The soft glow spilled from windows as people began gathering for evening prayers. Soon, hymns rose into the darkening sky, their familiar verses carrying on the crisp air. From the native families' fires came the steady rhythm of drums and the ancient songs of their people. The two sounds, hymns and chants, wove together in the mountain twilight, neither overpowering the other. Noel closed his eyes, feeling the vibrations of both in his chest. Here was the harmony he'd been seeking since laying down his rifle years ago, not in isolation, but in the bringing together of different hearts under heaven's vast sky. He opened his eyes to find Clara watching him, her face soft in the fading light. "Your faith has been restored," she said. It wasn't a question. "In God's mercy," he replied. "In justice without vengeance. In the family he provides when we're lost." He squeezed her hand gently. "In love that heals old wounds." Tay leaned against him, secure in the knowledge that his people's waters were safe, that his new family was strong. The boy who had stumbled, wounded into Noel's clearing, now stood tall, a bridge between two worlds. As night settled fully over the mission, stars piercing the dark velvet sky, Noel gazed at the mountains he'd once thought would be his only companions. Their peaks stood eternal, but no longer seemed lonely. Here, with Clara's strength beside him and Tay's trust to guide him, he had found something greater than solitude. He had found peace. The mission bell tolled once more, calling them inside to warmth and fellowship. As they turned from Bramble's grave, Noel saw his path clearly at last. No longer the deadly hunter, but a guardian of hope. No longer alone, but surrounded by the family God had led him to through grief and mercy. Together they walked toward the glowing windows of the mission, where both hymns and chants welcomed them home. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.